Now that the Potato Masher series has been going on for close to 4 years, one of the most common bits of feedback I get is that Nvidia has either willingly sabotaged the GTX 760's performance, along with other cards from that generation, or AMD has just supported its older cards better than Nvidia. Specifically, I get a lot of people asking if a Radeon 7950 would have been a better choice, and I wonder the same thing too. I was actually planning on buying a 7950 early on in the Potato Masher's planning since it had more VRAM and I've personally owned several 7950s and really enjoyed them. For the money, I think the 7950 was one of the best cards you could get around 2012 and 2013 since it was easy to overclock and relatively cheap to buy. I ended up selling my cards for more than I paid for them while Litecoin mining was booming. When I was planning the Potato Masher build, used 7950s were slightly cheaper than new GTX 760s, but most used ones had probably been run hard as mining cards, and I jumped at the chance to buy a new GTX 760 with its lower power requirements, quieter fan, and warranty. But if Nvidia has neglected the 700 series, and hindsight being what it is, should I have gone with a 7950? Well, let's find out. I picked up a Sapphire 7950 Boost on eBay for $80 shipped. That's the exact same model as one I used to own, and that price is about $10 to $15 more than the average GTX 760 appears to be going for these days, so the cards are still comparable on price. If you aren't familiar with the Potato Masher, here are its specs, and I encourage you to watch some of the other videos on my channel to get up to speed. Basically, I'm comparing it against the PS4 for the PS4's lifecycle to see which one is a better gaming value. Here are some disclaimers for this test. The 7950 requires two 8-pin power plugs to the 760's two 6-pin power plugs, even though total power consumption is fairly similar. Because of this, I swapped in a spare Corsair 650-watt power supply to make sure neither card would have any power limitations. Of course, this means that if I'd gone with the 7950 a few years ago, I'd have probably needed to spend at least $10 to $15 more on a power supply. I also overclocked both cards by about 100 MHz on the core and 100 MHz on the RAM, since that's about all the 760 can manage and that's how I normally run it for tests. The 7950 had about another 50 to 60 MHz left in the core and a bit more in memory that could be turned up, but there's no reason to push it that hard for this test since overclocking ability will differ amongst used models. A good middle-of-the-road overclock should be fine. The last disclaimer is about testing methodology. I can't use drivers from 2013 and compare them to drivers from today because old drivers are bound to have more issues with modern games, and if we're comparing how the cards fare today, we need to use modern games. So I'm referencing this chart from AnandTech comparing the two cards. I've linked it in the description of this video too. While each card trades off wins against the other, they are almost always within 10% of each other and neither seems to have a definite lead, at least when the cards were new. With modern drivers and using modern games, will we see a bigger difference? Well, up first is Assassin's Creed Origins, and the 7950 has an average of 36 frames per second with a peak of 46, and the 760 has a average of 29 and a peak of 39. So right out of the gate, you can see that the 7950 is a bit better, and I'm probably going to refer to these just as AMD and Nvidia cards, just because they both start with 7s, and I'm probably going to get that wrong at some point. Up next is Doom at medium settings, like all of these tests are going to be for the most part. And the AMD card has an average of 54 and a max of 72, and the Nvidia card has an average of 53 and a max of 76. So not really a big difference there. AMD has a slightly higher average and a slightly lower peak. That doesn't really mean much. I would say both of these cards are very comparable in this game. In the just released Battlefield 5, the AMD card has an average of 56 and a peak of 62, and this is during the first war story at 1080p medium settings again, while the Nvidia card has an average of 38 and a peak of 42, which means that the Nvidia's peak frame rate is lower than the AMD card's minimum frame rate, which is really bad for Nvidia. And of course, this is running a 60-second fraps benchmark during normal gameplay. Moving on to Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Similar story, not quite as bad though. Medium settings, 1080p. The AMD card has an average of 39 and a peak of 47, while the Nvidia card has an average of 33 and a peak of 41, so the AMD card wins once again. In Forza Horizon 4, at low settings at 1080p, going for like a 60 FPS smooth experience, the AMD averages 54 and has a max of 72, while the Nvidia card averages 40 and has a max of 56. So the 7950 once again has a significant lead over the GTX 760. And then finally with Kingdom Come Deliverance, this is another huge difference. 1080p, medium settings, the AMD card is an average of 53, a max of 58, while the NVIDIA card is an average of 37 with a max of 42. So in a lot of these scenarios, with a little bit of tweaking, it's almost like the 7950 can deliver a 60 FPS experience in a lot of games where the NVIDIA card might only be good for a 30 FPS experience, maybe with slightly higher visual settings. The AMD card is not twice as fast, obviously, but in many scenarios it is 30 to 50% faster, which is a significant difference than it was back in 2013. So what should we make of this? There's no question that AMD has wrung more performance out of this card in the past few years compared to NVIDIA, but that's not the whole story. The 7950 is significantly louder, and despite consuming similar power, it heats my office noticeably faster. I blame the superior cooling setup because the 760 is just sitting there and baking while the 7950 is trying to shed the heat. Installing the drivers was also more difficult. While Windows always auto-detects the HDMI port on the 760 and I can run the computer just fine while I install the official drivers, I had to drag out a DVI-capable monitor to hook up the 7950 to install drivers. Once they were installed, I had to mess with a custom resolution for a few minutes to make it work correctly with a 4K monitor. Granted, most people would get this set correctly once and then leave it, but it's not as easy as the NVIDIA card. And like I said earlier, the AMD card would require a better equipped power supply. Even with all of that, it's unquestionably faster, and if I knew then what we all see now, the 7950 would be the better choice. It would still be pile driving the PS4 in most games, as opposed to equaling it more often than not in 2018. If it wouldn't mess up the point of the test, I'd probably flip the 760, spend a few extra bucks, and have fun. As it is, I am going to stick to the 760 for the rest of the PS4 lifecycle as promised, and let this video serve as buying advice for anyone building a budget PC in 2018. Thanks for watching, let me know what you think about this test in the comments, and I'll see you next time.